Emptiness. That was the first thing I felt every morning. Not cold, not hunger, but precisely that. A ringing, oppressive emptiness that filled every cell of the vast house, once full of life, now a mausoleum of my memories. 2 weeks had passed since Richard's funeral. 2 weeks since I woke up alone in our regal, indecently spacious bed, where his side remained untouched, the duvet neatly made, as if he would return at any moment. But he wouldn't. And that knowledge, sharp as a shard of glass, pierced me every time I opened my eyes. I, Eleanor Vance, at 72 years old, had always considered myself a strong, resilient woman. All my life, I had been the backbone, the home base, the quiet harbor for my Richard, a successful businessman, an outstanding man, as everyone said. He was my universe, my compass. Now the compass was broken, and my universe had shrunk to the size of this living room, where I sat, wrapped in an old woolen throw blanket he had given me for our 30th anniversary. Outside, a drizzling autumn rain tapped against the windowpane, a monotonous, lulling melody. The rose leaves in my garden, once vibrant and fragrant, now seemed withered, tired, just like me. On the table before me sat a half-cold cup of Earl Grey tea, which I used to brew for both of us. Now I drank it alone, slowly, almost tasteless. This house, our pride, our lake house, with its countless rooms, the creaking floorboards Richard so loved, and the enormous windows offering a view of the endless expanse of water, now felt alien to me. Too big, too quiet. Every creak, every rustle seemed like voices from the past, reminding me of what was and what no longer is. My cat, Mittens, the only one who shared my solitude, slept on my lap, curled into a dense, fluffy ball. His soft, rhythmic purr was the only sound capable of muffling, if only slightly, the silence that rang in my ears. The uneasy truce with silence was shattered 2 days later, not by the memory of Richard, but by the jarring crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Michael's Porsche, a gleaming, arrogant beast, pulled up beside my modest sedan, followed by Tiffany's equally ostentatious SUV. I hadn't expected them so soon, though I should have. Grief, for them, was clearly a secondary emotion to avarice. I stood by the window, the old lace curtain clutched in my hand, watching them emerge. Michael, my son, my only child, was a blur of expensive tailored suits and a carefully cultivated air of corporate detachment. Beside him, Tiffany, his wife of 10 years, a woman whose beauty was as sharp and cold as a diamond, adjusted her designer sunglasses, scanning the house with an acquisitive gaze that made my skin crawl. They moved with a predatory grace, like two perfectly coiffed vultures circling their prey. "Mother, so good to see you," Michael said, his voice a practice bomb that never quite reached his eyes. He gave me a brief, perfunctory hug, smelling faintly of cologne and ambition. Tiffany offered a swift air kiss, her cheek barely grazing mine. "We're so sorry for your loss, Eleanor," she chimed, her tone flat, devoid of genuine sympathy. Her eyes, however, were already taking inventory, lingering on the antique grandfather clock, the Persian rug, the oil painting of the lake. We sat in the formal living room, a place rarely used since Richard preferred the cozy den. The air felt charged, heavy with unspoken intentions. I offered them tea, but they declined, eager to get to the point. "Mother," Michael began, clasping his hands together, his corporate persona firmly in place, "we need to discuss the future. Richard, well, he left quite an estate. And, frankly, things need to be handled efficiently." My heart constricted. Efficiently. Was that what his father's legacy amounted to? A transaction? Tiffany leaned forward, her voice a purr, yet laced with steel. "It's for the best, Eleanor. You're not getting any younger. Managing such vast assets would be a burden. The lake house, for instance," she gestured around dismissively, as if it were a run-down shack, "it's a lot to maintain. And the portfolio, well, that requires a certain financial acumen, wouldn't you agree?" I gripped the arms of the armchair, my knuckles white. Richard always managed it all. He kept meticulous records. "I'm quite capable." "Capable of what, Mother?" Michael interrupted, his voice losing its veneer of politeness. A vein pulsed in his temple. Capable of staring out at the lake? Of gardening? Look, let's be frank. Dad was generous, but he didn't exactly set you up to manage a multi-million-dollar empire. You have your pension, of course. And the bungalow upstate, which we can visit you at, from time to time. The words hung in the air, cold and calculated. My pension. The old, tiny bungalow that had been Richard's childhood home, kept for sentimental reasons. They wanted the lake house, valued at a staggering $35 million, and Richard's entire stock portfolio, worth an astonishing $50 million. They wanted everything. They had already divided it in their minds. We'll take the lake house, of course, Tiffany declared, as if announcing a minor rearrangement. It's perfect for entertaining clients, and we can host family holidays. And the stocks. Michael has a team of advisors who can manage them far more effectively than anyone else. It's what Richard would have wanted, Mother, for his legacy to continue to grow under capable hands. My vision blurred, a hot wave of indignation washing over me, quickly followed by a chilling dread. This wasn't just about money, it was about erasing me, dismissing my entire existence with Richard. My role, my life, my love, all reduced to an inconvenient obstacle. Then came the final, brutal blow, delivered by Michael, his eyes hard and unyielding. Let's be honest, Mother. You're useless now. Dad's gone. You don't have a purpose here anymore. The air left my lungs in a ragged gasp. Useless. The word echoed in the cavernous room, in my ears, in the very core of my being. My son, the boy I had raised, the man I had loved and supported, had just rendered me obsolete. His wife, Tiffany, simply watched, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her perfectly made-up lips. It was then, in that moment of profound betrayal and searing pain, that something deep within me, something long dormant, began to stir. The quiet, grieving Eleanor was being forced to remember. They left as abruptly as they arrived, their expensive cars spitting gravel as they sped down the driveway. The silence that returned was no longer just the silence of grief. It was laced with the bitter tang of betrayal and the chilling echo of Michael's words, "You're useless now." I stood in the doorway, watching their tail lights disappear, a cold knot forming in the pit of my stomach. The house, which had felt too big before, now felt like a cage. I wandered through the familiar rooms, each step heavy, each touch a remembrance. The photographs on the mantelpiece, the books on Richard's favorite armchair, the faint scent of his pipe tobacco clinging to the study curtains, they were all ghosts, mocking my new reality. My son had not just taken my inheritance, he had tried to strip me of my dignity, my very identity. But something simmered beneath the surface of my despair. A tiny, stubborn spark. Perhaps I wasn't useless. Perhaps I simply hadn't been needed in this particular way for a very long time. My feet, as if guided by an unseen force, carried me into Richard's study. It was a room I rarely entered when he was alive, respecting his need for privacy in his work. Now it felt like hallowed ground, untouched since his last day. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, leather, and Richard's subtle cologne. His large mahogany desk dominated the room, its surface usually impeccably organized. Today, it held only a stack of unopened mail and a half-finished crossword puzzle. I ran my hand over the smooth, cool wood of the desktop, a pang of fresh grief mixed with a strange sense of purpose. Michael and Tiffany hadn't touched this room. They hadn't needed to. To them, Richard's business was neatly accounted for in ledgers and digital files, not in the dusty corners of a personal sanctuary. My gaze fell upon a small, ornate drawer, usually kept locked, on the right side of the desk. Richard always kept his most private papers there, or so I assumed. A sudden, inexplicable urge compelled me to try it. To my surprise, it wasn't locked. Or perhaps Richard, in his haste, had forgotten to secure it before he left. Inside, nestled amongst a few old fountain pens and a dried inkwell, lay a small, dark wooden box about the size of a paperback book. It was intricately carved, with swirling patterns I didn't recognize, and secured with a tiny, silver filigreed lock. This was something I had never seen before. Richard, my methodical, predictable Richard, wouldn't have kept something like this hidden unless it was profoundly important. Or profoundly secret. A shiver, not of cold but of premonition, traced its way down my spine. My fingers, surprisingly steady, fumbled with the clasp. It clicked open with a soft, almost conspiratorial sound. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, were not old love letters or forgotten photographs, as I might have expected. Instead, I found a deck of antique playing cards, their backs adorned with unusual, almost occult-like symbols, a serpent coiled around a tree, an eye within a pyramid, a lone star shining over a crescent moon. They felt thick and heavy in my hand, their edges softened by time. Tucked beneath them, carefully preserved, was a single, delicate Edelweiss flower, its petals dry and fragile, its white a ghostly whisper of former life. But it was the yellowed slip of paper, folded precisely in half, that truly caught my eye. It was unaddressed, written in a bold, almost aggressive script that was definitively not Richard's elegant hand. My heart thumped against my ribs, a sudden, frantic rhythm. I unfolded it slowly, the paper rustling like old leaves. On it, in stark, unwavering ink, were just a few words. Find Hades well if you want the truth. Hades well. The name resonated with a dark, mythical echo. A chill, unlike any I had felt from the autumn rain or the loneliness of the house, settled over me. This wasn't a love note, not a business reminder. This was something else entirely. Something dangerous, something that hinted at a life of Richard's I knew nothing about. The emptiness of the house suddenly receded, replaced by a burgeoning sense of unease, a prickling curiosity that warred with a primal fear. My husband, the man I thought I knew inside and out, had left me not just a will, but a mystery. And in that moment, as the words Hades well burned into my mind, I realized Michael and Tiffany's greed, their cruel pronouncements, were insignificant compared to the shadow that had just fallen over Richard's memory, and, by extension, over mine. My quiet life had just been violently interrupted, and I had a chilling suspicion it would never be truly quiet again. 48 hours. The phrase had echoed in Michael's cruel words, promising a swift end to my inheritance, a clean sweep for his greedy hands. But now it was a different kind of countdown, a prelude to a revelation I could barely grasp. The small, ornate box with its cryptic message felt like a live thing, tucked away in my purse, its presence a secret weight against my hip. I walked into Arthur Henderson's office, the familiar scent of old books and polish doing little to calm the tremor in my hands. Michael and Tiffany were already there, seated opposite each other in high-backed leather chairs, radiating an air of smug anticipation. Michael's phone was out, presumably checking stock prices, while Tiffany meticulously reapplied her lip gloss, her gaze sweeping over the polished wood and framed law degrees on the walls, as if sizing them up for purchase. They barely acknowledged my arrival, a quick, dismissive glance before returning to their silent victory dance. Arthur Henderson, a man whose silver hair and kind, weary eyes belied a razor-sharp legal mind, rose to greet me. He was an old friend of Richard's, not just his lawyer, and a wave of warmth washed over me at his gentle smile. "Eleanor," he said, his voice soft, "please have a seat." The room was hushed, the only sound the distant hum of city traffic. Arthur cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we are here for the reading of Richard Vance's last will and testament." He picked up a thick, official-looking document, bound with a red ribbon and a wax seal. Michael and Tiffany exchanged triumphant glances. "Richard was a meticulous man," Arthur began, "and his affairs are, as always, in impeccable order." He proceeded to read from the document, his voice a low monotone, detailing the distribution of Richard's vast estate. As he spoke, a cold dread began to settle over me. It was exactly as Michael and Tiffany had described. The lake house, the stock portfolio, the significant bank accounts, all were, by this initial document, bequeathed directly to Michael, with provisions for Tiffany. My pension, the bungalow upstate, those were my meager lot. I felt a fresh wave of humiliation, a sting of tears behind my eyes. So, this was it. They had won. My quiet life was over, replaced by a forced exile and the bitter knowledge of their betrayal. Michael smirked, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Tiffany allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. Then Arthur paused, looking up from the document. He removed his spectacles, polishing them slowly with a handkerchief. Michael and Tiffany shifted, impatient. However, Arthur said, his voice now taking on a different timbre, a note of subtle mischief I hadn't heard before, Richard was also a man who appreciated a challenge. He reached into a hidden compartment of his briefcase, producing not another legal document, but a plain, unsealed envelope, slightly yellowed with age. It bore no official stamps, just Richard's elegant, familiar handwriting, for Eleanor, only. Michael's smirk faltered. Tiffany's lip gloss application paused mid-stroke. "What is that, Arthur?" Michael demanded, his tone suddenly sharp. "We've just heard the will. There are no other documents." Arthur merely smiled, a knowing, almost secretive smile. "On the contrary, Michael. Richard left specific instructions for this envelope to be presented after the initial reading. It is a codicil of sorts. A letter of instruction detailing the true nature of his estate." He looked directly at me, a flicker of something akin to encouragement in his eyes. He slowly, deliberately, broke the wax seal. The quiet in the room intensified, thick with apprehension. He unfolded the single sheet of paper within. "It reads," Arthur began, his voice clear and resonant, "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means I have passed, and our son has likely demonstrated the character I always feared he possessed. My true legacy and your future rests not in simple bequests, but in a journey. All of my significant assets, the lake house, the investment portfolio, every penny beyond your immediate needs, are held within an irrevocable trust managed by the Vance Foundation. Access to this trust, and ultimately its control, is not granted through a simple signature. It is granted only to the one who can prove worthy, who can follow the path I have laid out, who can find the keys to my true intentions. These keys are hidden, woven into a series of riddles and challenges, designed to reveal the truth not only about my life, but perhaps about yours. This quest, Eleanor, is for you and you alone. No one else has the knowledge or the capacity to complete it. Arthur has the initial instructions for your journey. Good luck, my love. May the truth set you free." A profound silence descended. Michael and Tiffany stared, their faces draining of color, morphing from smug satisfaction to utter disbelief, then to a stark, horrified white. The words irrevocable trust and riddles and challenges seemed to hang in the air like an invisible gauntlet thrown down. A quest." Tiffany finally stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "What kind of nonsense is this, Arthur?" "This is a joke." "It is no joke, Mrs. Vance," Arthur replied, his voice calm, but with an underlying steel. "Richard established this trust over a decade ago. It is legally binding. The initial will details the surface of his estate, but this letter outlines the conditions for its true release. And as it states, only Eleanor can fulfill them." He looked at Michael. "Your access to these substantial assets, I'm afraid, is entirely contingent upon your mother's success. Or, more accurately, her participation." My heart, which had been heavy with grief and humiliation, now pulsed with a strange, exhilarating mix of fear and defiance. Richard. My quiet, dependable Richard. He had done this. He had not abandoned me to their greed. He had given me a weapon. And a purpose. Michael and Tiffany sat frozen, their faces pale, their dreams of instant wealth shattered, replaced by the terrifying realization that the useless old woman they had just dismissed was, in fact, the sole gatekeeper to their fortune. I felt a tiny, almost imperceptible smile touch my lips. The game, it seemed, had just begun. The silence that followed Arthur's words was thick enough to choke on. Michael's jaw worked, his face a mask of disbelief, then a blotchy red. Tiffany, ever the more composed, but equally stunned, merely blinked, her perfect mascara suddenly seeming to melt at the edges. They looked at me, no longer with disdain, but with a dawning horror, as if I had suddenly transformed into an alien creature. The tables, so cruelly turned, now creaked under the weight of their shattered expectations. This is preposterous. Michael finally choked out, slamming a fist onto the armrest of his chair. A quest? Riddles? Dad was a brilliant businessman, not some eccentric madman. This is clearly a fabrication, Arthur. You're in on this, aren't you? Arthur Henderson merely raised an eyebrow, his expression unperturbed. Richard was indeed a brilliant man, Michael. And I assure you, every word of this trust and his instructions is legally sound and meticulously documented. I have been his counsel for over 30 years. He foresaw this reaction. All you need to know is that your access to any substantial portion of his estate is now entirely dependent on your mother fulfilling the conditions he outlined. Tiffany, finding her voice, screeched, but she's 72. She can't go traipsing around, solving riddles. It's absurd. It's dangerous. The irony of her concern, so conspicuously absent just 2 days prior, was not lost on me. A strange warmth began to spread through my chest, chasing away the chill of their earlier insults. It wasn't triumph, not yet, but a quiet, powerful surge of something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Richard, my predictable, steady Richard, had truly orchestrated a masterpiece. He had seen them, seen all of us, and crafted a path specifically for me. It seems your father had more faith in me than you do, Michael, I said, my voice, to my own surprise, steady and clear. The words felt foreign on my tongue, imbued with an unfamiliar strength. Michael glared, his face contorted with a mixture of rage and desperation. This changes nothing, Mother. You won't be able to do it. You'll mess it up, and then we'll all lose everything. You're still useless. But the word, this time, held no sting. It bounced off a newfound resolve. I looked at Arthur. What happens now? Arthur smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. Now, Eleanor, the Vance Foundation, as trustee, will provide you with a modest stipend for your immediate needs and any expenses related to this quest. My office will also be available to you for any necessary administrative support or information access that Richard specifically designated for you. And, he added, glancing pointedly at Michael and Tiffany, any interference from others will be met with severe legal repercussions, as per the trust's provisions. Richard was quite thorough in ensuring your undisturbed pursuit of the truth. My son and his wife seethed impotent. Their faces, still ghost-white, were now twisted with a terrifying blend of frustration and simmering malice. They hadn't just lost their immediate grab at wealth, they had lost control. And that, I knew, was far more infuriating to them. I left Arthur's office feeling a strange lightness, despite the immense weight of the task ahead. The emptiness of the house was still there, but it was no longer just about grief. It was now an empty canvas, waiting for me to paint a new story. Back home, Mittens greeted me with a soft headbutt against my leg, his purr a comforting rumble. I made myself a fresh cup of tea, but this time, there was a spark in my eyes, a quickening of my pulse. The sting of Michael's words still lingered, but beneath it, something more potent was stirring. I went straight to Richard's study. The small, carved box still lay open on the desk, the antique playing cards with their mysterious symbols, the pressed edelweiss. And the note, "Find Hades well if you want the truth." Hades well. The name gnawed at me. Was it a physical place? A code? A metaphor? Richard was a man of logic, an engineer by training, but also a connoisseur of classic literature and mythology. He would never choose such a name lightly. I pulled out my old, worn atlas, a relic from our early married life when we dreamed of traveling the world. I flipped through pages, searching for any place that might bear such a name. Nothing. It wasn't a famous landmark, not a historical site I recognized. My gaze then drifted to an old, brittle city map, tucked away in the bottom drawer of the desk, a map of our own town, Oakwood Falls, from decades ago. Richard had always kept it, insisting it was useful for remembering old streets and forgotten landmarks. It was covered in faint, almost imperceptible pencil markings. My fingers traced the lines, the familiar streets, the winding river. And then I saw it. Faint, almost erased, in a long-forgotten, overgrown section of the old industrial district, near the abandoned textile mills that had shut down in the 70s, was a small, circled X. And next to it, scrawled in Richard's own hand, almost invisibly, were two words: Old Pump. Old Pump. Hades Well. The connection, though tenuous, sparked a thought. In ancient times, wells were often seen as gateways to the underworld, to the realm of the dead. A pump, an old, disused one, in a forgotten part of town. Could it be? A thrill, a genuine rush of adrenaline, shot through me. This wasn't just about money or revenge. This was about understanding Richard. About peeling back the layers of a life I thought I knew and discovering the man beneath. And in that moment, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Richard's study, I realized Michael and Tiffany had not just given me a reason to fight, they had unwittingly given me a reason to live. The quiet, grieving widow was gone. Eleanor Vance, seeker of truth, had awakened. And Hades Well was calling. The next morning, the air still crisp with the promise of autumn, I traded my usual comfortable cardigan for a practical windbreaker and sturdy walking shoes. My hands, usually accustomed to pruning shears or knitting needles, now clutched the old city map, its brittle edges threatening to crumble. Mittens, sensing a shift in my routine, watched me from the kitchen counter with an expression of mild disapproval. "Don't worry, old boy," I murmured, stroking his soft fur. "Grandma's got a mystery to solve." The abandoned industrial district of Oakwood Falls was a place few ventured anymore. Once a bustling hub of textile mills and manufacturing, it had slowly succumbed to decay, a ghostly monument to a bygone era. The pavement was cracked, overgrown with tenacious weeds, and the air carried the faint, metallic scent of rust mixed with damp earth. Graffiti, crude and faded, adorned the crumbling brick walls of empty factories. Finding the general vicinity of the X on the map was easy enough, but locating a specific old pump in a landscape of derelict machinery and overgrown lots was another matter. The morning sun, initially bright, now struggled to pierce through a thick canopy of neglected trees and ivy that had reclaimed much of the land. I walked slowly, my eyes scanning the debris-strewn ground, my ears alert to every rustle and creak. This was not the manicured world of Richard Vance, the successful businessman. This was a place of secrets, of forgotten histories. It felt dangerous. A tremor of fear snaked through me, but it was quickly overridden by a surge of determined curiosity. Richard had sent me here. He expected me to find it. After nearly an hour of fruitless searching, clambering over fallen bricks and ducking under broken fences, I was about to give up when I spotted it. Tucked behind a collapsing corrugated iron shed, almost swallowed by a thicket of thorny bushes, stood a rusted, skeletal structure of iron and wood, undoubtedly an old well pump. Its handle was long gone, the well itself a dark, uninviting maw in the earth, barely visible beneath a layer of fallen leaves and trash. "Hades Well," I whispered, the words tasting like dust on my tongue. It wasn't a grand, mythical portal, but a forgotten, desolate hole in the ground. Yet, the sense of dread deepened. What truth could possibly lie hidden in such a forsaken place? Carefully, I pushed aside the thorny branches, revealing a small, almost invisible crevice at the base of the pump's stone foundation. My fingers, surprisingly nimble, probed the darkness. They brushed against something cold and metallic. With a grunt of effort, I pulled it out. It was a small, lead-weighted fishing lure, heavy and intricately designed, but what struck me was not its craftsmanship, but the tiny, almost imperceptible engraving on its side, a stylized V. Vance. And beneath it, a series of numbers that looked like coordinates. This was the first key. As I tucked the lure into my pocket, a shadow fell over me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Standing a few yards away, partially obscured by the shadows of a crumbling wall, was a man. He was roughly my age, perhaps a little younger, with a lean, weathered face, sharp, intelligent eyes, and a perpetually worried frown etched between his brows. He wore a faded denim jacket and carried a well-worn toolbox. My mind instantly identified him. Marcus Thorne. an old colleague of Richard's from his early days at Sterling Engineering. Richard had always spoken of Marcus with a mixture of respect and pity, a brilliant mind, but a man who never quite achieved the same level of success. I hadn't seen Marcus in decades. Eleanor. Marcus's voice was raspy, laced with surprise. He looked genuinely shocked to see me in this forgotten corner of the world. What on earth are you doing out here? This place is dangerous. I tried to compose myself, my hand instinctively clutching my pocket where the lure lay hidden. Marcus. What a surprise. I was just taking a walk. Reminiscing about Richard, you know. He always had a soft spot for the old industrial areas. The lie tasted sour, but I couldn't risk revealing my purpose just yet. Marcus's eyes, however, were shrewd. They flickered to the old pump, then back to me, a knowing glint in their depths. Richard, huh? Yes, he certainly did. He spent a lot of time poking around these parts, even after he made his millions. Always had a knack for finding hidden things. He paused, his gaze fixed on me. He told me once, many years ago, that if anything ever happened to him, and if you ever came looking, I should tell you, he called it his deep well of projects. My breath hitched. Deep well. Hades well. The connection was undeniable. What kind of projects, Marcus? I asked, trying to keep my voice even, though my heart was pounding. He hesitated, glancing around nervously as if someone might be listening. Richard was a man of many layers, Eleanor. More than most people knew. He was an engineer, yes, but he also had connections. Powerful ones. And a keen interest in uncovering things. Things that certain people would rather keep buried. He lowered his voice, leaning slightly closer. He was involved in some rather unorthodox ventures. Not illegal, mind you, at least not that I ever saw directly, but certainly on the fringes. He had a talent for finding value where others saw only waste, and secrets where others saw only silence. He paused again, a shadow crossing his face. Sometimes, Eleanor, those secrets attracted undesirable attention. Richard always had to be careful. Always had to watch his back. A cold dread spread through me. Richard, watching his back? My dependable, loving husband? The image was jarring, unsettling. This wasn't the Richard the first knew. Or perhaps, this was a side of him I had deliberately chosen to ignore. What kind of attention, Marcus? I pressed, my voice barely a whisper. He shook his head, a troubled look in his eyes. I can't say, Eleanor. Richard was very private about his deep well projects. But I can tell you this. He wasn't just building bridges and designing factories. He was dismantling things too. Exposing things. And that kind of work, for a man with a family, usually means he had a very good reason to keep it all a secret. For your protection. He gave me a long, searching look. Be careful, Eleanor. Richard was a good man, but he lived in a world with sharp edges. And if you're digging into his deep well, you might just find out why he built such strong walls around it. With a final, enigmatic nod, Marcus turned and walked away, disappearing quickly into the overgrown thicket, leaving me alone once more with the rusted pump, the chill in the air, and a terrifying new picture of my late husband forming in my mind. The old pump, I now understood, was more than just a place. It was a doorway into a hidden life, a life where Richard Vance was not just an executive, but a man who had danced on the precipice of danger, and whose secrets were now, by his own design, becoming mine. The encounter with Marcus Thorne left me shaken, a cold unease settling deep in my bones. The world I thought I knew, the carefully constructed reality of my marriage to Richard, was beginning to splinter. Hades Well was not merely a sentimental riddle, it was a cryptic pointer to a dangerous past, a hidden life Richard had meticulously concealed. The lead fishing lure, now nestled in my pocket, felt less like a trophy and more like a heavy burden. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, the conversation with Marcus replaying in my mind. Richard, involved in unorthodox ventures, dismantling things, exposing things, and watching his back. It was an image utterly at odds with the calm, steady man who had read me poetry by the fireplace and carefully tended his rose garden. Yet, as I thought back, tiny, Forgotten fragments of memories began to surface, late-night phone calls taken in hushed tones, sudden, unexplained business trips, a certain tension in his jaw when he thought I wasn't looking. I had dismissed them then, attributing them to the pressures of his high-powered career. Now, they felt like breadcrumbs leading down a dark, unfamiliar path. The coordinates on the fishing lure were my next step. Using an old GPS device Richard kept in his study, I painstakingly entered the numbers. They led me not to another dilapidated industrial site, but to a seemingly innocuous address in a bustling commercial district, a nondescript office building housing various small businesses. The contrast was jarring. The following afternoon, summoning a courage I didn't know I possessed, I found myself standing before the building. It was a modern, glass-fronted structure, anonymous and uninviting. My heart hammered against my ribs. What lay inside? Another cryptic clue? Or something more sinister? I took a deep breath and pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby was sterile, echoing with the clatter of keyboards and the murmur of distant conversations. A directory listed dozens of businesses, from accounting firms to marketing agencies. My coordinates pointed to Suite 302. As I stepped out of the elevator on the third floor, I noticed a young woman emerging from Suite 302. She was in her late 20s, perhaps early 30s, with a cascade of fiery red hair pulled back in a messy bun, and intelligent, piercing green eyes that missed nothing. She carried a bulky camera bag slung over her shoulder and clutched a well-worn reporter's notebook. Her name, I saw on the small plaque beside the door, was Sarah Jenkins, investigative journalist. Our eyes met. Her expression, initially preoccupied, sharpened with a flicker of curiosity as she took in my somewhat disheveled, but determined, elderly appearance. Most people didn't come to this floor unless they had a specific appointment. "Can I help you, ma'am?" she asked, her voice surprisingly warm, yet with an underlying edge of professional caution. I hesitated. Should I reveal my purpose? The thought of confiding in a stranger, especially a journalist, went against every instinct I possessed. But Richard's quest had already shattered so many of my old rules. And something about her direct gaze felt honest. I'm looking for something connected to Richard Vance, I admitted, my voice a little shaky. My husband. He recently passed away. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. The name clearly resonated. She paused, then took a step back, gesturing towards her office. Richard Vance? Please come in. This might be more than a coincidence. I followed her into a small, cluttered office. Stacks of files teetered on every surface, maps were pinned to the walls, and a large corkboard was covered with newspaper clippings, photographs, and red string connecting various points. It was a whirlwind of information, a stark contrast to my own quiet home. Have a seat, Sarah offered, clearing a pile of papers from a visitor's chair. I'm Sarah Jenkins. And yes, I know who Richard Vance was. Or, rather, who he seemed to be. She leaned back in her own chair, her gaze unwavering. I've been investigating the Vance Foundation for a while now. Specifically, some questionable transactions and a series of disappearances linked to a few of their less transparent projects from about a decade ago. My blood ran cold. Disappearances. Sarah nodded, her expression serious. Minor employees, a few disgruntled former contractors. Nothing ever officially linked to the foundation, of course. But the patterns, they're too consistent. And then there's the Vance Project X files, rumored to be Richard's personal black book. Supposedly, it contains evidence of a vast money laundering scheme involving several prominent local figures and a shadowy organization that operates almost entirely under the radar. But no one has ever found definitive proof. She studied me, her green eyes piercing. Why are you looking for something connected to your husband, Mrs. Vance? If it's about his will, I assure you, I have no interest in family squabbles. I took a deep breath, the decision made. I pulled out the fishing lure, placing it on her desk. He left me a quest. A series of riddles and challenges. This, I tapped the lure, was the first key. It led me to an old pump, a place he called Hades Well. And it led me to you, via these coordinates. Sarah picked up the lure, examining the tiny V engraving, then the series of numbers. Her eyes grew wide with dawning realization. Hades well, a deep well of projects. That's what some of my anonymous sources called Richard's hidden operations. And these coordinates, they match a drop point I've been tracking for months, a place where information was supposedly exchanged. She looked at me, a new respect in her gaze. Your husband was far more than just a businessman, Mrs. Vance. He was playing a very dangerous game. So I'm beginning to understand, I said, the words heavy with the weight of this new, terrifying truth. Marcus Thorne, an old colleague, told me Richard was dismantling things, exposing things. He said Richard needed to watch his back. Sarah nodded slowly. That aligns with everything I've found. Richard Vance wasn't just building an empire, he was building a case. A very big, very risky case against some very powerful people. And if this quest of his is what I think it is, he's left you the final pieces of the puzzle. The ones that could bring it all crashing down. The implications hung in the air, a suffocating presence. My quest was not a game. It was a dangerous legacy thrust upon me by a husband who, even in death, continued to challenge everything I thought I knew. I had come seeking answers about Richard, but I had found something far more profound and terrifying. I had become a player in his unfinished game, a reluctant participant in a war against shadows. And suddenly my quiet, gentle life felt like a distant, impossible dream. My encounter with Sarah Jenkins was not just a meeting, it was an induction. I was no longer merely a widow. I was a target. News travels fast in Oakwood Falls, especially when millions of dollars are at stake. My meeting with Sarah Jenkins, though discreet, seemed to ripple through the town like a stone dropped in a pond. Michael and Tiffany, no doubt fueled by their own dwindling hopes and the incessant buzzing of their network, swiftly realized that my quest was more than an old woman's sentimental journey. It was a genuine threat to their perceived inheritance. The first sign of their renewed offensive came a few days later, a barrage of phone calls. Not conciliatory calls, but accusatory, demanding ones. "Mother, what are you doing?" Michael's voice, usually modulated for business, was now shrill, laced with panic. "Arthur tells me you're asking questions. Meddling in Dad's old affairs. You'll ruin everything. Do you understand the implications of what you're doing?" "I understand perfectly, Michael," I replied, my voice calm, almost unnervingly so. The frantic edge in his tone only bolstered my own resolve. "I'm following your father's instructions. Something you seem unwilling to do." "Those instructions are madness." Tiffany shrieked in the background, her voice tinny and distorted. He was clearly senile. "This is just a pathetic attempt to keep us out of our rightful inheritance." "Your rightful inheritance is currently being managed by a trust that your father created," Tiffany, I retorted, a spark of defiance lighting within me. "And I am merely seeking the truth he wanted me to find." The calls escalated from angry demands to thinly veiled threats. They started sending lawyers letters, filled with legal jargon about mental competency and undue influence, attempting to challenge the trust and my authority. I forwarded every single one to Arthur Henderson, who simply chuckled and reassured me. "Richard accounted for all of this, Eleanor. Their attempts are futile. Just keep following his path." But their desperation grew. One evening, as I was tending to my rose garden, a sleek black sedan, unmistakably Michael's, pulled slowly past the house, its windows tinted, a dark, unsettling presence. I felt eyes on me, an unsettling prickle on my skin. It was a subtle intimidation, a reminder that they were watching. Then came the rumors. Whispers began to circulate amongst my bridge club ladies, at the grocery store, even from the gardener. Stories about my erratic behavior since Richard's death, my sudden obsession with his past, my supposed mental instability. It was insidious, designed to paint me as a senile old woman unfit to handle anything, let alone a multi-million-dollar estate. I knew it was Tiffany's handiwork, her talent for social manipulation honed over years of charity galas and exclusive club memberships. It stung, I won't deny it. To have my sanity questioned by my own family, to see the pitying glances of old acquaintances, was a bitter pill. But then I remembered Michael's words, "You're useless now." And the fire within me burned brighter. If they wanted to play dirty, I could too. I had learned a thing or two about observation and psychology from Richard over the years, subtle arts he used in his own negotiations. I called Arthur Henderson. "Arthur," I said, "I need some information about Michael and Tiffany's financial dealings. Nothing illegal, of course, just their public records. Any business ventures, any loans, any vulnerabilities." Arthur paused, a flicker of surprise in his voice. "Eleanor, are you sure? This could get messy." "It's already messy, Arthur," I replied, a cold resolve in my voice. "And if they want to treat me like a pawn, they'll find I'm a queen who knows how to move her pieces." A few days later, a discreet package arrived from Arthur's office. Inside were detailed reports on Michael's failing startup ventures, propped up by risky loans, and Tiffany's extravagant spending habits, which far outstripped Michael's legitimate income. They were stretched thin, living on borrowed time and the promise of Richard's fortune. Their desperation was not just greed, it was survival. Armed with this knowledge, I set my own trap. I arranged a casual lunch with Mrs. Davison, a notoriously gossipy member of the Oakwood Falls Ladies' Charity Committee, a woman who adored Tiffany and often repeated everything she heard. Over cucumber sandwiches and Earl Grey tea, I spoke, seemingly offhand, about Michael's recent financial struggles, expressing my concern for their difficult situation and how terrible it would be if all those risky investments came crashing down without Richard's safety net. By the next morning, the whispers had shifted. No longer were they questioning my sanity. They were buzzing about Michael's impending financial ruin and Tiffany's potentially disastrous social standing. The tide of public opinion, a fickle thing, began to turn. Tiffany, who valued her reputation above all else, was particularly susceptible to this. The phone calls from Michael and Tiffany didn't stop, but their tone changed. The outright threats diminished, replaced by a whining desperation, an appeal to my maternal instincts. They were still circling, but now with a wary respect, like dogs who had learned that the old cat had sharper claws than they'd imagined. Their escalating attacks, though distressing, only hardened my resolve. They served as a constant reminder of why Richard had set this quest in motion. He hadn't just foreseen their greed, he had anticipated their cruelty. And he had armed me, the useless old woman, with the means to fight back. As I looked out at the familiar, tranquil lake, a chill wind rippled across its surface, stirring the depths. I knew this was just the beginning. Richard's secrets were not just clues, they were weapons. And I was learning how to wield them. The subtle shift in Michael and Tiffany's tactics, from outright hostility to whining manipulation, brought a perverse sense of satisfaction. It was a small victory, a testament to Richard's foresight and my own unexpected capacity for strategic maneuvering. But the satisfaction was fleeting, quickly overshadowed by the growing unease within me. Each step of this quest peeled back a layer of the life I thought I knew, revealing a substratum of shadows and secrets I was ill-equipped to comprehend. Marcus Thorne's warnings, Sarah Jenkins's revelations, and the chilling phrase "Hades well" were now constant companions, whispering unsettling truths in the quiet corners of my mind. As I delved deeper into the few cryptic clues Richard had left, a faded photograph of a building I didn't recognize, a series of seemingly random dates scratched into the back of an antique watch, a small, curiously heavy brass key without a lock. My own memories became fragmented, almost hallucinatory. It was as if Richard's hidden life was now actively seeking to reshape my past, coloring familiar moments with an unnerving new hue. I'd find myself staring at a wedding photo, Richard's arm around my waist, his smile warm and genuine. But now my mind would conjure the image of Marcus's worried eyes, muttering about Richard, watching his back. Had that smile, that perfect facade, concealed a constant vigilance? Had our life together been, in some unspoken way, a part of his elaborate cover? One afternoon, while searching through a box of old travel souvenirs, I came across a small, intricately carved wooden bird from a trip we'd taken to Austria decades ago. Richard had bought it for me, a sweet, spontaneous gesture. But as my fingers traced its smooth surface, a forgotten memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. We were in a small alpine village, snow falling gently. Richard had excused himself for a business call, leaving me in the hotel lobby. He returned hours later, his face pale, his eyes distant. I remembered asking if he was all right, and he'd simply said, "Just a difficult negotiation, my dear." I'd accepted it, of course. But now, juxtaposed with the Edelweiss in the mysterious box, a flower native to the Alps, the memory felt sinister. Was it a negotiation? Or something else entirely? A drop? A meeting with those shadowy organizations Sarah spoke of? Another memory, equally unsettling, pushed its way to the forefront. Years ago, Richard had taken a sudden, uncharacteristic interest in an old, abandoned fishing lodge deep in the woods, not far from our lake house. He spent weeks out there, supposedly clearing brush, but he always returned exhausted, distant, and covered not in dirt, but with a faint, unfamiliar scent, something metallic and earthy, like the air around the old pump. He'd brought back old fishing gear, claiming he'd cleaned out the shed. Now, the lead fishing lure from Hades Well mocked me from my pocket. Was the lodge another deep well project? A staging ground? The most disturbing revelation, however, wasn't about Richard's clandestine activities, but about my own unwitting role. There was a time, long before I met Richard, when my life had been different. Before the quiet gardens and bridge clubs, before the gentle rhythm of domesticity, there had been a younger, sharper Eleanor. A woman with an unusual talent for observation, a keen eye for detail, and a remarkable memory. I had dismissed those years, pushed them deep down, seeing them as a youthful folly, a rebellion against my strict upbringing. But now, as I found myself effortlessly piecing together clues, noticing patterns, and sensing danger, that younger Eleanor began to stir within me, demanding recognition. Could it be that Richard had not simply chosen me for my quiet charm, but for something else entirely? For the very skills I had suppressed, the dormant abilities he somehow recognized? Was his love a calculated component of his cover, a brilliant camouflage for both of us? The thought was a bitter poison, yet it resonated with a horrifying logic. My comfortable, beloved life with Richard, the bedrock of my existence, suddenly seemed like a meticulously constructed stage, and I, the unaware actress, playing the part of the devoted wife. This burgeoning realization, the terrifying possibility that my entire marriage might have been, in part, a grand illusion, sent shivers down my spine. It was a deeper betrayal than Michael's greed, more profound than any hidden financial dealings. It meant Richard, the man I loved and trusted implicitly, had kept a fundamental part of himself and perhaps a fundamental aspect of our life, a secret from me. And that secret was now forcing me to confront not just who he was, but who I had been, and who I was destined to become once more. The comfortable mask of the grieving widow was cracking, revealing a harder, more complex face beneath. The journey was no longer just about Richard's truth. It was about reclaiming my own. The disparate threads of Richard's intricate web, the fishing lure, the coordinates, the cryptic dates, the small brass key, began to converge, guided by my own awakened intuition and Sarah Jenkins's meticulous research. The final clue, a combination of the dates and the key's intricate carving, led us to a private collection in a forgotten wing of the old Oakwood Falls Public Library. Not a public archive, but a sealed room, accessible only with a specific key and a historical access code. It was a place Richard had frequented in his youth, a place of quiet scholarship, now repurposed for something far more significant. Sarah had used her journalistic connections to arrange discreet access. The room was cold, dusty, smelling of aged paper and forgotten ambition. Row upon row of ancient, leather-bound tomes stood sentinel, their spines cracked, their contents unread for decades. But behind a rotating bookshelf, a hidden alcove was revealed, containing not more books, but a single modern safe. The brass key, fitting perfectly into the lock, opened not the safe itself, but a smaller, almost invisible compartment built into its side. Inside lay not money, not jewels, but a single, encrypted USB drive and a typewritten letter, sealed with the same wax as Richard's will codicil, addressed to me. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was from Richard, his familiar words now carrying an unsettling weight. He explained everything. The unorthodox ventures Marcus spoke of were his years as a deep-cover informant for a clandestine government agency, tasked with exposing a massive international network involved in illicit arms dealing, money laundering, and human trafficking, operating under the guise of legitimate corporations, one of which was the very Vance Foundation that now held his assets. His wealth was a carefully constructed legend, a crucial part of his cover. Hades Well, he wrote, was the code name for the entire operation, my descent into a world of shadows, all to protect the light we shared, Eleanor. My life with him, he confessed, had indeed been a part of his cover, a shield, but not a lie. My love for you is real, my dearest. It was the only truth that kept me sane in that darkness. But I chose you also because I knew, deep down, the strength you possessed, the intellect you hid. I knew that if anything happened to me, you would be the only one capable of completing what I started. He acknowledged the risk, the burden he was placing on me. I needed to make sure they couldn't simply take everything, that my life's work would not be in vain. And I needed to make sure you were protected, even if it meant forcing you to remember who you truly are. The USB drive, he explained, contained the irrefutable evidence, names, dates, financial records, locations, everything needed to expose the network and bring down the powerful figures involved. It was his ultimate legacy, his final act of justice. But then came the choice. As I held the letter, the USB drive clutched in my other hand, a figure emerged from the shadows of the alcove. He was a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed, with eyes that were cold and assessing. I recognized him instantly from photos Sarah had shown me, a man named Sterling Vance, Richard's estranged cousin, a shadowy figure rumored to have deep ties to the very organizations Richard was investigating. He had been quietly observing our every move, his own interests tied to Richard's fortune, or perhaps to the secrets it contained. Sterling Vance stepped into the dim light, a predatory smile playing on his lips. Eleanor. Or should I say, the reluctant inheritor. Richard always did love his games. And it seems he left you the grand prize. He nodded towards the USB drive. That, my dear, contains enough information to topple empires. And ruin many powerful lives. Including, I might add, a few names that would tarnish Richard's own reputation were they ever exposed in such a public manner. My heart hammered. What are you talking about? Richard was a brilliant operative, Sterling said, his voice smooth as silk, yet with an underlying menace. But even the purest intentions can get sullied in the field. There are certain operational compromises, certain necessary evils he committed, that, if revealed alongside his heroic exposé, would cast a very different light on his legacy. Perhaps even implicate him in some of the very activities he claimed to be fighting. Not to mention, he added, his eyes narrowing, the lives of a few, well-meaning, but ultimately expendable, individuals who were caught in the crossfire. He paused, letting his words hang heavy in the air. Here's my offer, Eleanor. Give me that drive. I will ensure Michael and Tiffany receive a substantial portion of the trust, enough to satisfy their greed. And you, my dear, will receive a generous settlement, far beyond what your son begrudgingly offered. You can have your quiet life back, with even more comfort. Richard's legacy will remain pristine, his name unsullied. And those collateral damages will remain buried, protecting their families from public scrutiny and further harm. He extended his hand, his gaze unwavering. Or you can expose everything. Richard's full truth, warts and all. The network will fall, yes. But so might a few innocent bystanders, and Richard's heroic narrative will be stained. Michael and Tiffany will get nothing, and your newfound purpose might lead you down a very dangerous path, far from your rose garden. The network won't take kindly to being exposed, Eleanor. They will come for you. The air in the cold library room crackled with an unspoken threat. The choice was stark, agonizing. The USB drive, a beacon of justice, now felt like a viper in my hand. Did I fulfill Richard's ultimate mission, exposing all the ugly truths, even if it meant compromising his name and endangering others, including myself? Or did I accept Sterling's insidious offer, ensuring my safety, securing some form of wealth for my family, however undeserving, and preserving a sanitized version of Richard's legacy, but at the cost of the full truth and the justice he had so desperately sought? My mind reeled, grappling with the moral chasm before me. This was not just about money or revenge. It was about legacy, about justice, about the price of truth, and the uncomfortable compromises that even good men sometimes make. And the quiet, gentle Eleanor Vance, the woman who had sought only peace, was now standing at the precipice of a decision that would define the rest of her life, and perhaps the lives of many others. The choice felt heavier than any burden I had ever carried, a crucible forged in Richard's hidden life, demanding a strength I wasn't sure I possessed. The cold air of the library settled around me, thick with Sterling Vance's insidious offer. His eyes, devoid of warmth, promised both safety and a gilded cage, a return to my quiet life, bought with the very truth Richard had died to protect. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. To expose everything meant to shatter the carefully constructed myth of Richard Vance, to potentially implicate unintended victims, and to invite untold danger upon myself. To accept Sterling's deal meant to betray Richard's ultimate sacrifice, to let the darkness he fought remain hidden, and to live with the knowledge that I had chosen comfort over justice. My gaze flickered from Sterling's outstretched hand to the USB drive, then to Richard's letter, its words echoing his faith in me, in the strength I possessed. The image of Michael and Tiffany's greedy faces flashed in my mind, followed by the quiet determination in Sarah Jenkins's eyes, her unwavering pursuit of truth. And then there was the memory of Richard himself, not the man of secrets, but the man who would hold my hand, who would tell me stories, whose love had been my anchor. He had loved me truly, he had written, but he had also chosen me for the woman beneath the surface, the woman I had forgotten. A deep breath filled my lungs, and a calm, cold certainty settled over me. Richard had spent his life in the shadows to bring light. To turn away now, to silence his final truth, would be to extinguish that light. My quiet life was already gone, irrevocably shattered by his death and my son's betrayal. There was no going back to the Rose Garden, not truly. Not after this. The woman who cherished peace had to make war. No, I said, my voice firm, though a tremor still ran through me. I gripped the USB drive tighter. I will not. Richard's legacy is not something to be bought and sold, Sterling. And neither is the truth. Sterling Vance's smile vanished, replaced by a chillingly predatory sneer. A foolish choice, Eleanor. You have no idea what you're meddling with. These people, they are ruthless. You will regret this. Perhaps, I countered, meeting his cold gaze with a newfound steel in my own. But I will not live with regret for failing Richard. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. He stared at me for another long, tense moment, then let out a low, humorless chuckle. Very well. Don't say I didn't warn you. He turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving me alone in the dusty alcove, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. My heart raced, not with fear, but with a terrifying exhilaration. I immediately called Sarah Jenkins. Sarah, I said, my voice barely a whisper, I have it. All of it. The USB drive. Richard's final confession. Her excitement was palpable, a stark contrast to my own somber resolve. Eleanor, that's incredible. Where are you? We need to go over this immediately. I explained the situation, Sterling's offer, my refusal. Sarah's response was immediate and resolute. Good. We'll need to be careful. Sterling Vance is connected. We need to secure this evidence, copy it, and get it into the right hands before they can try to suppress it. The next few hours were a blur of intense activity. Sarah, with her journalistic expertise and a few trusted contacts, made multiple encrypted copies of the USB drive. The data was overwhelming. Thousands of files, audio recordings, encrypted communications, detailed financial ledgers, and a comprehensive list of names. From local politicians and judges to international financiers and shadowy figures I had never heard of. It was a vast, sprawling criminal enterprise deeply embedded in the fabric of society. Richard, working from within, had systematically documented its every corrupt fiber. And then there was the truth about Richard himself. The files confirmed Sterling's veiled warnings. Richard had indeed made compromises. There were instances of money being channeled to unexpected places, of lives being manipulated, of lines blurred between justice and its pursuit. He had played a dangerous game, sometimes sacrificing smaller pieces to capture larger ones. One file, particularly chilling, detailed a containment operation that resulted in the disappearance of a key witness who was becoming a liability. Richard's notes, accompanying the file, expressed deep regret, but stressed the absolute necessity to protect the larger mission and the lives of his other operatives. My stomach churned. The hero of my quest was also a man stained by the very darkness he fought. He wasn't a knight in shining armor, he was a warrior, scarred and compromised. The bitter poison of his love as a cover returned, but it was now tempered by the understanding of his immense burden, his impossible choices. He had chosen to live with these horrors to protect me, to protect his ideal of justice. The most profound revelation, however, wasn't just about Richard. It was about Hades Well itself. It wasn't just a code name for his operation. It was also the name of a secure, off-grid server, hidden deep within a disused bunker beneath the old fishing lodge I remembered. A data archive, inaccessible to all but Richard, and now, with the USB drive and my specific biometrics to me. It was the true heart of his legacy, the final repository of all his darkest, most critical information, designed to be released only if he was no longer able to. The scale of Richard's courage and the depth of his secrets hit me with the force of a physical blow. He hadn't just orchestrated a quest for me, he had set in motion a posthumous operation to dismantle a criminal empire. And he had, knowingly or unknowingly, cast me as its reluctant, septuagenarian protagonist. The ground truly felt as if it had shifted beneath my feet. My calm, predictable world had been swallowed by the abyss of Richard's secret life, and I was now standing on the edge of the precipice, armed with a truth that could either bring down giants or consume me entirely. The revelation of Richard's double life, his compromises, and the sheer scale of the criminal network he sought to dismantle left me reeling. But the shock quickly gave way to a cold, unwavering resolve. The initial grief for the loss of my husband had been replaced by a fierce determination to honor his true legacy, even if it meant confronting a reality far grimmer than I could have ever imagined. The useless old woman was gone. In her place stood Eleanor Vance, guardian of a dangerous truth. Sarah Jenkins and I spent the next frantic days meticulously reviewing the contents of the USB drive, cross-referencing names, deciphering codes, and preparing the evidence. Sarah, with her sharp mind and relentless energy, was an invaluable ally. She understood the gravity of the situation, the immense power of the forces we were about to challenge. We knew that once this information was released, there would be no turning back. The plan was clear. A carefully orchestrated release of the evidence simultaneously to multiple federal agencies, a trusted media outlet Sarah had connections with, and, as a final failsafe, an anonymous dead man's switch that would ensure publication even if we were silenced. We worked in Sarah's small, cluttered office, fueled by strong coffee and a shared sense of urgency. The first direct confrontation came not from Sterling Vance or his shadowy associates, but from Michael and Tiffany. They had caught wind of our activities, no doubt through their own desperate probing, and the rumors that had circulated about their financial woes had only intensified their panic. They stormed into Sarah's office, unannounced, their faces contorted with fury and fear. "What in God's name are you doing, Mother?" Michael roared, his voice echoing in the small space. He pointed a trembling finger at the corkboard, now covered with names and connections, some of which he vaguely recognized as prominent figures. "Are you out of your mind? You'll destroy Dad's reputation. Our family name." Tiffany, her usual icy composure shattered, shrieked, "You're exposing everything. Our social standing. Michael's business connections. This is madness. Give us that drive, you senile old fool." She lunged towards the desk, her manicured fingers grasping for the laptop where the evidence was displayed. but I was no longer the shrinking violet they remembered. A cold, hard glint entered my eyes. With surprising speed, I intercepted her, my hand slamming down on her wrist, a sudden, sharp pain radiating through her arm. Tiffany gasped, recoiling, staring at me with a mixture of shock and terror. "Do not lay a hand on this, Tiffany," I said, my voice low and steady, laced with an authority that stunned even myself. "This is Richard's legacy. His true legacy. And it is about to expose the rot that he fought against for years." I looked directly at Michael, my gaze unwavering. "Your father spent his life fighting these people, Michael. He risked everything. He made compromises, yes, to protect the larger mission. To protect you. And your greed, your desperate attempts to cling to a false inheritance, only served to validate his worst fears about you." I gestured to the screen, where a particularly damning financial transaction linked directly to Sterling Vance and a major political figure was highlighted. "This network, Michael, is far larger and more dangerous than you can comprehend. Your father was an operative, deep undercover, exposing illicit arms deals, money laundering, and human trafficking. Your inheritance, the millions you craved, were a part of his legend. And your uncle, Sterling Vance, is deeply implicated." Michael's face went from red to ashen. The mention of Sterling Vance, the cold hard facts of his father's dangerous double life, and the sheer scale of the criminality finally pierced through his selfish myopia. Tiffany slumped into a chair, her perfectly coiffed head in her hands, mumbling about her ruined reputation. Their personal greed, in the face of such overwhelming darkness, suddenly seemed petty, almost insignificant. You were part of this, Dad?" Michael whispered, his voice broken. "You live like this?" "He did," I confirmed, a profound sadness in my voice. "And he did it to bring justice. And now I am going to finish his work." But the battle was far from over. As we were making the final preparations for the data release, the alarms in Sarah's building suddenly blared. Footsteps pounded in the hallway. Sarah, quick thinking, instantly disconnected the network, grabbing the main encrypted drive. "They're here," she whispered, her face grim. Sterling Vance didn't waste any time. He sent his people. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. The moment of reckoning. But instead of panic, a strange calm settled over me. Richard had prepared me for this, in his own way. He had awakened the old Eleanor, the one who saw patterns, who thought quickly, who refused to be a victim. "Sarah, the ventilation shaft," I said, pointing to a small, almost unnoticed grate high on the wall, near the ceiling. It was too small for a man, but... Sarah's eyes widened. "Eleanor, you're not thinking." "I am," I interrupted, my voice firm. "You take the main drive. Get out. Find a safe place, release it. I'll create a diversion. But, Eleanor, they won't expect an old woman to be anything but a hindrance," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "That's been my cover for 72 years. It's time to use it." A loud bang echoed from the door. Time was running out. I grabbed a heavy, old trophy from Sarah's shelf, its polished brass gleaming. "Go, Sarah. Now." With a final, desperate nod, Sarah scrambled onto the desk, her agile frame squeezing into the narrow shaft, disappearing into the darkness just as the door burst open. Two burly men, their faces cold and professional, stormed into the room. "The drive," one of them barked, his eyes sweeping the room, then fixing on me. I held up the heavy trophy, my arm surprisingly steady. "You want it? Come and get it." My voice, though trembling slightly, carried a defiance I hadn't known I possessed. This was not the quiet, grieving widow. This was Eleanor Vance, fighting for the truth, for Richard's legacy, and for a freedom I had only just begun to understand. The battle was fierce, unexpected, and utterly terrifying, but as the first man lunged, I swung the trophy with all the force of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The clang of the heavy brass trophy connecting with the first assailant's temple echoed sickeningly in the small office. He reeled back, stunned, giving me a precious few seconds. The second man, momentarily surprised by the ferocity of an old woman, hesitated. It was all I needed. My adrenaline surged, a potent cocktail of fear and fury. I wasn't fighting for property anymore. I was fighting for Richard's truth, for Sarah's escape, for my own life. I didn't possess brute strength, but I had surprise, desperation, and decades of observing human behavior. I kicked out, connecting with the first man's shin, sending another jolt of pain through him. As he stumbled, I grabbed a stack of overflowing files from the desk, sending them cascading to the floor, creating a chaotic barrier. It was messy, undignified, but effective. The old hag's got some fight in her, the second man growled, regaining his composure. But before he could advance, the sound of distant sirens began to wail, growing rapidly closer. Sarah, bless her quick mind, had not only escaped but had also raised the alarm. The two men exchanged grim glances. Their mission was compromised. They exchanged quick, urgent words into their hidden comms, then turned and bolted, disappearing down the hallway as quickly as they had arrived. Moments later, the office was swarming with police officers, their faces grim, their weapons drawn. I stood there, panting, the heavy trophy still clutched in my trembling hands. My body ached, my heart pounded, but beneath the physical exhaustion, a profound sense of relief washed over me. Sarah was safe. The drive was safe. Richard's truth was in motion. The police investigation was a whirlwind of questions, statements, and bewildered glances at the disheveled office and the determined, but bruised, old woman who insisted she had been attacked by men looking for classified documents. They didn't fully believe me, but the broken door and the fresh marks on the walls were undeniable. Arthur Henderson arrived shortly after, his face etched with worry, but a flicker of pride in his eyes when he saw me. He smoothly took over, guiding the officers and ensuring my narrative was coherent. Within hours, the first bombshell dropped. Sarah, true to her word, had found a secure location and released Richard's data. The initial story, a meticulously crafted exposé by Sarah and her network, hit the internet like a tidal wave. It detailed the vast money laundering operations, the illicit arms trade, the shadowy figures involved, and the intricate web of deception woven by the Vance Foundation's charitable ventures. Richard Vance, initially presented as the heroic, if complicated, informant, became the focal point of a global scandal. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. News channels around the world broadcast the story. Arrests began, not just locally, but internationally. Prominent figures, once untouchable, were implicated, their reputations shattered, their empires crumbling. The Vance Foundation was swiftly seized, its assets frozen. Michael and Tiffany, already reeling from the previous week's events, were utterly devastated. Their faces, captured by news cameras outside their now-frozen lake house, were pale, drawn, and utterly stripped of their usual arrogance. The millions they had so greedily coveted were gone, swallowed by the collapsing foundation and the subsequent investigations. Their desperate attempts to distance themselves from Richard's criminal connections only highlighted their former complicity and ignorance. Michael, specifically, found himself under scrutiny for his own dubious business dealings, now revealed to have been tangentially linked to the fringes of the network Richard was investigating. They were left with nothing but the ruins of their ambitions and the crushing weight of public shame. Their initial betrayal, the casual cruelty of their words, had come back to haunt them with a vengeance far more potent than anything I could have orchestrated. As for Richard's legacy, it was complex, painful. The initial reports lionized him as a brave whistleblower, a secret agent of justice. But as the full extent of his operational compromises began to surface, the manipulated lives, the containment operations, the narrative shifted. He became a more ambiguous figure, a man of profound moral grayness. A hero, yes, but one whose hands were undeniably stained by the very darkness he fought. There were fierce debates in the media, in academic circles, about the ethics of his methods, the price of his truth. For me, the realization was profound. Richard had indeed loved me, but his life had been a constant, agonizing tightrope walk. He had shielded me from the world of shadows, not by lying about his love, but by building a separate, pristine world around it. The betrayal I had felt earlier, the sting of being an unwitting pawn, gradually softened into a deep, melancholic understanding. He had not diminished me, he had, in his own complicated way, protected me until the very end. I was not offered the full inheritance of the trust, not in the traditional sense. The bulk of Richard's assets, once purified through the legal system, was eventually channeled into a new, transparent foundation dedicated to fighting human trafficking and white-collar crime, directly overseen by Sarah Jenkins and a team of ethical legal experts. It was a true legacy, a redemption of his tainted wealth. I, however, was granted a substantial settlement from the remaining funds, enough to ensure my comfort and independence for the rest of my days, far more than my pension and the upstate bungalow. The storm had passed, leaving behind a profound stillness. I sat once more in my living room, the lake stretching out before me, but this time, the emptiness was different. It was no longer a void of grief or betrayal, but a vast, silent space filled with the echoes of a life far grander and more complicated than I could have ever known. The conflicts were resolved, the major players accounted for, but the scars remained. And as I looked at my reflection in the window, I saw not the quiet, fragile widow, but a woman forever changed, forged in the crucible of truth. The dust of the scandal settled slowly, like ash after a forest fire. Oakwood Falls, once a haven of quiet wealth, was now a town synonymous with intrigue and corruption, its carefully manicured facade peeled back to reveal the grime beneath. Michael and Tiffany, stripped of their power and their ill-gotten gains, disappeared from public view, their names whispered with disdain rather than admiration. Their comeuppance, while satisfying, left a hollow ache within me, the realization that the son I had raised had chosen a path of such shallow avarice. But amidst the wreckage, something new had emerged. The Eleanor Vance who had been content with her roses and her bridge club was gone, replaced by a woman forged in the crucible of Richard's secrets. The initial quiet comfort of my settlement felt almost alien. My old routines no longer fit, like clothes that had shrunk in the wash. The familiar scent of Earl Grey tea no longer brought solace, but the quiet hum of a mind now accustomed to deciphering riddles and confronting danger. My hands, once skilled in gardening, now found themselves drawn to different tasks. I spent hours reading, devouring books on international finance, political corruption, and the history of clandestine operations. Richard's study, once his private sanctuary, became mine. I pored over the few remaining papers he'd left behind, not for clues, but for understanding, trying to piece together the man he truly was, the man beneath the masks. I realized he had always been there, the brilliant, complex individual, but I had simply chosen to see only the gentle husband, perhaps out of a need for simplicity, for comfort. Sarah Jenkins became a frequent visitor, our bond solidified by the shared ordeal. She was a whirlwind of energy, already deep into new investigations, her passion for justice ignited further by Richard's case. We'd spend hours discussing the intricacies of the network he'd exposed, the legal battles still raging, and the broader implications for society. She often sought my insights, finding my knack for connecting disparate details surprisingly useful. "You see things others miss, Eleanor," she'd say, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. "Richard knew what he was doing when he left this to you. And I did see things." The years of quiet observation, of listening to Richard's subtle hints, of understanding the unspoken nuances of human interaction, had honed a perception I had long believed dormant. I found myself instinctively recognizing patterns, deducing motivations, anticipating reactions. It was a strength I had unknowingly possessed, and Richard, in his wisdom, had forced me to reclaim it. I began to volunteer, not for the usual charity galas, but for a local nonprofit dedicated to supporting victims of white-collar crime and human trafficking, the very scourges Richard had fought. My quiet demeanor, once mistaken for fragility, now became an asset. People confided in me, sensing a deep well of empathy and a formidable strength. I found myself counseling, guiding, and even discreetly connecting them with resources, using the very network of contacts Sarah and Arthur had built. My relationship with Michael remained fractured, perhaps irrevocably so. He occasionally called, his voice laced with bitterness and resentment, still unable to comprehend the magnitude of his father's actions or his own role in them. He saw only his lost inheritance, not the monumental struggle for justice. Tiffany, I heard, had retreated entirely from public life, her carefully constructed social world in tatters. I felt a pang of sadness for the loss of the son I once knew, but no regret for the path I had chosen. The lake house, once a symbol of both my comfort and my impending loss, was now a distant memory. I moved to a charming, smaller home in a different part of Oakwood Falls, one with a bright, sunny room overlooking a vibrant, sprawling garden. My roses flourished, tended with renewed vigor. Mittens, ever my faithful companion, reveled in the sunbeams that streamed through the windows. I was no longer just a widow. I was a survivor, a witness, a reluctant warrior. My life, far from ending, had found a new, unexpected beginning. The path Richard had laid for me had not just led to answers about his past, it had led me back to myself, to a strength and purpose I had long forgotten. The quiet hum of the universe no longer felt empty. It felt vibrant, challenging, full of possibility. I was Eleanor Vance, and I was finally, truly alive. The late afternoon sun, a mellow gold, streamed through the window of my new study, painting warm stripes across the polished wooden floor. It was a smaller room than Richard's old sanctuary, cozier, filled with the scent of fresh-cut roses from my garden and the faint, comforting aroma of old books. But these were my books, chosen for their wisdom, not for hidden clues. Mittens lay curled on the windowsill, a warm, purring lump of contentment, oblivious to the profound shifts that had reshaped my world. I sat at my new desk, a cup of chamomile tea steaming gently in my hands. The warmth spread through my fingers, a familiar comfort, yet everything felt different now. The quiet that enveloped the house was no longer the heavy silence of grief or the anxious stillness of impending danger. It was a peaceful quiet, a thoughtful quiet, filled with the murmur of my own mind, no longer frantic, but settled. It had been over a year since the decisive battle in Sarah's office, since Richard's truth had exploded onto the world stage. The world had moved on, caught up in new headlines, new scandals. But the ripples of Richard's work, the dismantling of that vast network, continued to send shockwaves through the underbelly of power. Sarah, now a respected investigative editor, sent me updates occasionally. Another arrest here, a new piece of legislation there, all stemming from the seeds Richard had sown. I thought of Richard often, not with the idealized grief of a heartbroken widow, but with a more complex, nuanced understanding. He was not the perfect, unwavering hero of my younger dreams, nor was he the manipulative stranger I had briefly feared. He was a man, deeply flawed, profoundly courageous, and agonizingly alone in his struggle. He had loved me, truly, but his love had been intertwined with a burden I could never have shared without losing my own peace. He had protected me, in his own way, by building a wall of domestic bliss around me, until the moment he needed me to step beyond it. And Michael, my son, the chasm between us remained. He was alive, yes, living a much humbler life now, far from the gilded cages of his ambition. He sent me an occasional, stilted card, filled with thinly veiled accusations and self-pity. The pain of that estrangement was a dull ache, a permanent scar on my heart. But the searing wound of his betrayal had healed, replaced by a quiet acceptance. He had made his choices, as I had made mine. And his choices had, ironically, forced me into my own unexpected becoming. The price of truth, I had learned, was steep. It demanded the shattering of illusions, the sacrifice of comfort, and the willingness to confront the ugliest parts of humanity, and even of those you loved. It had cost me my quiet, predictable life, the son I thought I knew, and the uncomplicated image of my husband. But what it had given me in return was immeasurable. It had given me courage, a strength I never knew I possessed. It had given me purpose, a sense of meaning in the twilight years of my life. It had given me Sarah's friendship, a connection based on shared conviction. Most importantly, it had given me back to myself. The younger Eleanor, sharp and observant, had not been a youthful folly. She had been waiting dormant for the right moment to awaken. Richard, in his final, masterful act, had not just bequeathed me an inheritance, he had bequeathed me a revelation of myself. I finished my tea, the warmth lingering. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of deep violet and fiery orange. My garden, bathed in the fading light, seemed to glow. The roses, vibrant and resilient, swayed gently in the evening breeze. They had weathered the storms, just as I had. I rose from my desk, walking to the window, watching the last vestiges of daylight fade. The world was still full of shadows, full of people like Sterling Vance, full of hidden injustices. But it was also full of light, full of people like Sarah, full of the quiet, unwavering resolve of those who dared to seek the truth. And I, Eleanor Vance, the once useless old woman, was now one of them. I was no longer a victim of circumstance, but an active participant in the ongoing dance between light and shadow. And in that, I found a profound, undeniable peace. The journey had been long, terrifying, and transformative. It had been, in its own way, a testament to love, a complex, imperfect, but ultimately profound love that transcended life and death and dared to ask, "What would you do for the truth?" My answer was clear.